Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and others who shall remain nameless. You know who you are. Yes, as I said, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and others who shall remain nameless. You know who you are. Yes. Yeah, well. Oh, anyways. Yeah, so I want to talk briefly about heredity in the evolutionary sense, because I'm still encountering young earthers who believe that every trait has to start over, de novo, brand new, every time a new species appears. And I think this comes from their notion that a new species is not descended from an older species, but that it somehow just magically appears because that's how it works in creationism. But that's not how it works in evolution. In evolution, you are descended from your ancestors. So you carry forward a lot of what your ancestors had. And there is a famous Ray Comfort sermon in which he says, well, the first dog was born blind and didn't have any eyes, and he had to grow eyes, and then he had to wait for a female dog to evolve. That's not how evolution works. Ray Comfort strategically gets it wrong on purpose, but a lot of his adoring worshippers and followers, they just regurgitate because they believe him, which is unfortunate because he is a liar, and he knows he's a liar, but I digress. The first dog wasn't alone. The first dog was part of a population of first dogs, plural. And the difference between these first dogs and their immediate ancestors, the proto-dogs, was almost imperceptible. In fact, it was imperceptible. The first dogs were descended from proto-dogs who were descended from dog-like wolves who were descended from just standardized wolves. And yes, the first dogs were a product of human-directed, unconscious human-directed, but human-directed evolution. Humans selectively chose those wolves who had certain characteristics. And it wasn't a decision, it wasn't a conscious choice. It was, this one's cute, this one's friendly, this one doesn't bite me when I'm petting it, this one cuddles with me when I'm cold. So these are the ones that we're going to treat better than the ones that are standoffish, hostile, and bitey. Yes. Yeah. And this is how wolves became dogs. Not all wolves, but some wolves became dogs. And the dogs didn't have to start fresh with a brand new eye and a brand new heart and a brand new stomach. They inherited these characteristics from their wolf ancestors, who inherited them from pre-wolf ancestors. Because, yeah, evolution doesn't start fresh with brand new everything every time. It carries forward things that have worked in previous ancestral species. So just as you will inherit characteristics from your parents and your grandparents, so a new species inherits characteristics from its ancestral species. They carry it forward, and let's face it, eyes and the ability to see are very useful traits in a vertebrate animal. They are very useful. So yes, these will be selected for consistently through selective pressure. Those that are born without them will not do well. But of course, how does the first eye evolve? If having them makes things better, well, that's the thing. We're talking about the Cambrian period. We're talking 500 million years ago that, that eyes first evolved. And yes, 550 million years ago, everybody was blind. There were no humans, there were no wolves, there were no mammals. There were no vertebrae. The ancestors of the vertebrate were worms that lived in the mud. And they were filter feeders. They ate nutrients from the mud. And these did not need eyes. But then they found that they needed the benefits of eyes in order to move beyond burrowing in the mud. And you can see it on modern earthworms. Modern earthworms have eyes. They don't have irises, they don't have pupils, they don't have sockets, they don't have the structure that we have, but what they have is a pigmented spot that is light sensitive. It reacts to light. And this is the first primitive eye. And yes, in worms, this is good enough. This works. And the benefit of having such a primitive eye? A predator, when you're on the surface of the mud, skidding around on the surface of the mud, and a predator comes near you, you have a better chance of spotting that predator and burrowing back into the mud before the predator can detect you, if you have the ability to detect something a little darker than the daylight. Now, this admittedly only worked in the daytime, but it worked. And so this trait was carried forward. The descendants of the worm who had this were more successful because they also had this. And so it spread throughout this population of worms. But then the ancestors of humans started swimming. They needed a better eye. An eye that would allow them to detect what direction the danger was coming from. So they needed the eye to have a bit of a cup with the light-sensitive patch at the back of it. And it could still just detect light and dark, without too much in between. So yes, by 540 million years ago, our ancestors were free swimming, had developed a notochord because this made it easier for them to swim, and they had developed an eye that allowed them to sense what direction the danger was coming from. From there, it's only a few steps to having the standard vertebrate eye, the eye that every fish, every amphibian, every reptile, every mammal, including humans, has. It's all the same eye, just in variations. It's refinements of an eye that already exists. And nobody starts brand new. Everybody inherits the eye of their immediate ancestors. It's part of the standard equipment. And this doesn't just go for individuals, it goes for new species. They inherit the eye of their ancestors, the heart of their ancestors, the lungs of our ancestors. These are all things that we inherit because they're carried forward, because they work. Because evolution, while it is not a conscious entity and it does not think, selective pressure does choose what works over what doesn't work. I hope I'm making myself clear on this. It's the first thing in the morning. This is my first mug of tea. Wow. I actually have a week off. I know, it's amazing. A week off. But yes, evolution doesn't start everything de novo every time a new species arises. Instead, it carries forward what worked in the previous species, the ancestor species. And the gradient between species is not absolute. It's a matter of proto, and then proto-proto, and then more proto, until you have something that is definitely. But the variations in between, and this brings us to ring species, the variations in between can interbreed. And it requires physical isolation to complete speciation. So if, this is hypothetical, if humans disappeared tomorrow and somehow Chihuahuas survived and Great Danes survived in the wild, but only on two separate continents, say the Chihuahuas survived in South America, the Great Danes survive in North America, and there's no longer ease of movement back and forth between them because the Darien Gap became even more Darien Gap-ish because, well, the Darien Gap is just hostile to all life, yeah, except trees and poisonous snakes and venomous spiders. Yeah, they love it down there, but otherwise, yeah. Chihuahuas survive in South America, Great Danes survive in North America. It would only take a few hundred generations for these animals to become separate species. They're almost separate species as it is. There are the ring species between them that make it possible for them to interbreed indirectly. Chihuahuas interbreeding with poodles, poodles interbreeding with beagles, beagles interbreeding with pit bulls, pit bulls interbreeding with huskies, huskies interbreeding with Great Danes, and back down the other way. So you have bigger dogs breeding with slightly smaller dogs, and smaller dogs breeding with slightly bigger dogs. And ultimately, yeah, this is how it works with a ring species. If you separated and isolated these dogs, eventually genetic drift would complete the incompatibility that already makes it impossible for a Great Dane and a Chihuahua to directly breed with each other. Yeah. But they're both dogs. And dogs are still a subspecies of wolf. And if you look at the diversity of domestic dogs, that is human-driven evolution, with human whims being the selecting factor. And I've already talked about selective pressure in other videos, so go back and look at those videos and check them out. But in any case, evolution carries forward those traits that work. And that is something that young earthers have to remember. Evolution carries forward traits that work. So no, evolution doesn't start with a brand new set of eyes and a brand new set of lungs. and a brand new heart and a brand new stomach every time that it comes up with a brand new species. These things are already established as things that work, and so they are carried forward through the process of speciation. Yeah. And I will explain ring species eventually. But just remember, evolution is not a conscious decision. It is not an entity. It does not make decisions. Evolution is a filter. It filters out what doesn't work, and it filters in favor of what does work. And, well, eyes are something that works. Anyway, I gotta go back in. Take care, be well, stay safe, ladies and gentlemen. Love yous all.